Welcome guys. Remember earlier in the year, I kicked up a video series called The Floor, and we haven't done an episode of The Floor for ages. I mean, I'm sure most of you guys have forgotten about it. The idea is, when I do like a big video where we talk about a lot of stuff, quite often there's a lot of really amazing discussion in the comments that I really want to respond to, but let's be real, replying in the YouTube comments can be so easily missed. And sometimes it's like, hey, this is a really good discussion I want lots of people to see and to get in on. So the idea of The Floor is like, you guys have the floor. You can drop your messages and then I'll respond. So that's what I've done here with the character tier list that I put out yesterday. So what I did was I rated as many characters as I could think of the top of my head in the Guild Wars franchise. And it was a fairly impromptu video. It wasn't a hard science. I had a lot of messages from you guys saying, oh my god, you're too inconsistent with the ratings. And I know, I was inconsistent with the ratings. I mean, what are we really judging? How much we like the character, just in general, how much we enjoy having them around, how well they were utilized in the story, how often we see them. You know, there's loads of different facets, and I kind of jumble them all in together, because that's, I guess, just where my mind goes. That's what I was sort of thinking when I tried to value them at a first glance. So, yeah, it was a bit messy, but, you know, I think it was fun anyway. Nonetheless, a lot of characters didn't even appear on the list. That's kind of the beauty of doing a tier list, sort of an impromptu style, I think. So I had a ton of messages. You guys wanted to know my opinions on characters that weren't there, and just sort of responses to some of the big topics. So it's just a lot of really cool story discussion. That's what I want to do. So let's jump in. The first question here is from Dropkick Goose, who said, as someone who barely remembers any of Season 1, and this isn't really a question, it's more of an observation that I was quite fascinated by. And I missed a lot of Season 1. I know Scarlet mainly from Season 2, the Silver Waste and Dry Top, and in the context of Morgemoth and its influence. And I really like Scarlet, especially the episode in Season 2 where you find her room, the tunnel underneath, her notes. I really like her at that point as a character. That's kind of fascinating to me. You know, we got this whole generation of people now who have no memory of the Season 1 stuff. So first thing that your comment made me realize is it's kind of weird there's not much Scarlet stuff in Heart of Thorns itself. You know, Heart of Thorns, Scarlet's whole thing is to usher in Heart of Thorns and Morgemoth. And it just speaks to how squashed I think that expansion was, and how many big plot lines there could have been, that she never kind of had a little moment in it. But you're right, definitely through Season 2, you can feel for her, and you can kind of get a sense of her. And I do think she actually probably plays a lot better as a character when she's not, like, there in person. Dropkick Goose here got a response in the YouTube comments, I don't have it on the screenshot, where someone said, yeah, actually seeing her and experiencing her was much worse. And I have to say, guys, you know, I've had some criticism for how high, say, I rated Bram, or how high I would rate Kanak, or how low, sorry, I rated Kanak, and you know, Aureen. I think a lot of people were angry how high I had Aureen for so long. But of all of that, I honestly thought the most controversy was going to be about the Scarlet placement. And nobody really even cared. There's really no messages of people that, but I have to say, guys, if you missed out on Season 1, there was a lot of hate towards Scarlet. Maybe it's forgotten at this point. Maybe the people who felt burned by all of that stuff, they're just not around anymore. I really don't know. Maybe people just have chilled out, and maybe I myself have chilled out. I remember feeling very strongly against Scarlet at certain times, but at this point, I kind of gave her that middle-of-the-road rating, and I sort of stand by it. Again, it's one of those things where I kind of see there's a cool story ArenaNet were trying to tell. The idea of Kiara as a tragic character who falls under Morgemoth's influence is something quite beautiful, and it just kind of got buried under the, like, this Harley Quinn ripoff. I think that's what a lot of people really just read Scarlet as. And, you know, a lot of games just do take and copy-paste characters from popular media. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But she definitely grated on people, and I'm surprised there was no real backlash against that. There wasn't even, as well, by the way, a backlash against my super high rating of Traherne. I don't know, maybe the Traherne haters just feel a bit browbeaten, and they were just being silent there, but I was happy to see, actually, a lot of you guys like Traherne too, so there you go. Maybe that wasn't as controversial as I actually thought it was going to be. Again, I do think there might be a redemptive moment for Scarlet if it turns out that something Omad's machine showed her goes a lot deeper than just this current turbulence with the Elder Dragon issue. You know, that item you can get, the Spinal Blades, where it's got the flavor text that says, someday, Kaith, you'll see that I was right. I'd love to see that get paid off, and post End of Dragons, or End of Dragons itself would be the time to see that, so who knows, maybe they will. Next, we've got Thurok, 1992, who says, where would you have put Tibble, Left Paw, all the other orders supporting characters in your tier list? And appending to this, I got another comment. This is from Chemistral, who said, while there have been many characters that stood out over the years, I will never forget Magister Siren's Charm, from the Priory section of the base game's personal story. So there were a lot of messages about this. One guy said, I'm pausing at the start of the video, and if Siren isn't on this list, and if Siren isn't S tier, I'm going to break something. Well, yeah, I missed out on them. Look, the way I got these characters was I put them in those blocks, and a lot of people did fall by the wayside. These are kind of the big three, right? I think for a lot of people. Tybalt, Siren, Forgul. And I do actually have a lot of opinions about why we like them so much and what they are as characters. They're very minor characters in the overall length of the story. But here's this thing, right? There's this anchoring situation I talked about a little bit in the previous video. People really cling very tightly to early opinions and early experiences. What you experience when you come into Guild Wars 2 and a lot of that core personal story stuff, it sits with you. Like, the first tragedy that occurs in this game is with those characters. And I think you'll feel that reverberate for years and years and years. In some ways, it's very difficult for Heart of Thorns or POF to actually meet some of those heights because you get anchored so heavily to what was going on early on. I don't honestly think the personal story was told that well, and I don't honestly think that there's that much substance to those characters. That said, I will account for the fact that I feel it too. I feel, some kind of a deep connection with those characters as well. My first was Siren, believe it or not. I'd kind of been interested in Order of Whispers, so that would have been Tybalt, but when the game actually launched and was out there, it was Priory that I picked first. I think Liz is a member of the Priory. So where do I rank them? Well, I actually think all three of them are separate. First of all, Tybalt is kind of, I believe, what the community says is the best one. If you were to ask the Hive Mind which was the best one, the community generally will go with Tybalt. And I think that Tybalt has a big impact because he's funny. And humor and comedy is one of those things you can do to quickly grab at someone's attention, quickly engender you to them, and then when you're only in the personal story for a short space of time before you get killed off, therefore it's the funny character I think that lasts the longest. I actually think that Forgul, the substance of him and who he is as a Norn, late in the day, I think is really, really fascinating, and I like Forgul a lot, but because he's only gets that small window as well, and also because the Vigil stuff feels so separate from the rest of the game, because the Vigil stuff is basically all in Ascalon, and it does feel like a complete side arc, a complete tangent, really. Forgul kind of, falls to the wayside. So Forgul probably is the bottom, Tybalt's at the top, Siren somewhere in the middle. But I will say that more often than not, and particularly on this video that I did, you guys are all talking about Siren. I don't know, and Siren kind of has like this thing where she says things are cherry, and there's something about her demeanor. She's so happy, and she's so cheerful, and so naive, and that's the, naivety is one of the big, ticket items when we deal with the Sylvari, like stereotypical Sylvari. So then there's like a greater sense of tragedy, I think, when Siren dies. You can kind of understand it with Forgul, you can kind of understand it with Tybalt, they're veterans in certain respects. But Siren, it's like really, really tragic. So I actually think that Siren is probably, was executed best. I've often romanticized and thought about and daydreamed about this idea of a reworked personal story. A personal story that really does the order arcs, like, very long. You know how through the personal story you rush through all the ranks really quickly? Well, what if that kind of actually happened in parallel to the entirety of the establishment of Fort Trinity and even the early Ore arcs? Which means your mentors can be around for a lot longer. In a personal story that's restructured a bit like that, and it isn't just copy-pasting stuff, I would actually have these characters die at different times. And I would have Tybalt die first, because he has a lot of impact real quick, and I think they do that perfectly. I would have Siren linger a little bit longer. I'd have Siren die somewhere around the Fort Trinity establishment area of the story for those players who are in the Dermot Priory. And I think that you could get some real tragedy, and she could have been beautifully executed as a character there. Forgul, I think players need a lot of time with. And I actually think if you're gonna kill him off, I actually kind of like the idea of having Forgul survive. Like, why do we have to kill all the mentors? But if we were gonna do that, I think you'd do that really late, because then you really, really get to sort of sink in with him as this father figure almost in certain respects, and then you'd see him leave. But as the game actually ends up standing, as much as I like Forgul, I think probably Siren is the one that gets the most emotion out of me. Tybalt is kind of easy to dismiss as just, a bit too much humor, a bit too cutesy, a bit too light. And look, I believe in levity, I really do. You might look at me and a lot of my discussion about Guild Wars 2 and think, oh, he just wants it all to be so dark and twisted and warped all the time, and that would be a drag. Believe me, I don't. When I look at games like Path of Exile and Rayclast, I actually don't like settings like that. They're too dark too much of the time. I believe in a balance, and I just think that ArenaNet's been slightly off with the balance. Tybalt is kind of representative of that levity side of it. So, yeah, I think Siren's my favourite. That's my honest ranking. I don't know where that would have been as far as the actual ratings on the tier list would have been. I don't know. Siren will probably be B or maybe even A. Tybalt at B or C. Forgul down at D, maybe even C or D. Not actively bad, but, could have had more time in the pot. I probably should have added a whole other rank level onto that tier list as well, don't you guys think? You know, just so we had a little bit more granularity in how we rate people. Next, we got this observation from Envy Spartan. It came in really early on the video's publishing. Logan was a simp. Since Heart of Thorns, he's rehabilitated himself. Well, look, there were a lot of people talking about Logan. Now, I've really spotlighted this here because I think I might have misrated Logan. Because I don't get it, guys. I don't know why, but I really like it whenever Logan's in a patch. Every time he's on screen, I get like this sense that like, oh yeah, an old character's come back, and I feel really fondly for it. And I think what's happened, right, is I like seeing Logan on screen, but what I'm really enjoying is this idea of coherence between the old stories and the new ones. And so therefore, the more that Logan's there, the more I feel like Tyria was like this well-planned out, fully plotted story where Logan is, you know, still able to act and do things, and he still has a story to tell. And I think what happens with me is I confuse all of those positive vibes with actually liking the character himself, when I really sit back and think about it. So I love to see Logan there, and there's nothing I actively dislike about Logan, but there was another comment someone left saying, oh, he's the neighbor who bangs on your wall because you're upsetting his wife or whatever, right? And I do get that he's quite a bland character, right? And he's very goody two-shoes, and he's very, like, whiter than white kind of thing. And I do get that. He's a bit boring, all right? So maybe I rated him too highly. And what might just have happened is that Logan's one of the last characters in that position of old story that can come forward. In a way. I mean, I'm talking about Destiny's Edge 1 here. Air's dead. Kaith and Ritlock have the luxury of being active participants throughout the whole thing. So who have you got left? You've got Logan and Zodja. And Zodja, notoriously, is gone. So Logan's the guy. Zodja, then, therefore, I wonder, if Zodja came into the new stories, would I have that, oh yeah, it's Zodja, badass? And, you know, to tell you the truth as well, I mentioned in that tier list that, you know, Zodja's really mean in the dungeon story. She's really nice in the racial stuff, and she's really mean. But someone pointed out, they said, you know, and I even said it in the video, to be fair to me, you know, that's quintessentially Asura to a certain degree. Arrogance and superiority complexes, and just generally abrasive, not nice characters to be around. In a way, you might mark Taimi and Goric and so on down, because they are kind of nice to be around, right? And a lot of Asura, the true Asura, are more like Zodja, and they're not nice to be there. So I almost wonder, right, whether, and I don't rate Zodja down, so what I almost wonder is, if Zodja came forwards again now, she returned to the story, and she was really quite rude again, would I cheer that on? I don't know how, I can't predict how I'd feel, but I think I might even quite like that, and I might end up liking her just as much as Logan. In a way, she's like the anti-Logan in that way, you know, they're very distinctly different kind of personalities and characters. You know, what I can say is if there was a story post-End of Dragons where we get like a sideways story and we're with Logan and Zodja, that would be so exciting to me. And this kind of leads me to another thing. And I don't want to bang on about Final Fantasy XIV too much here. Final Fantasy XIV, as I explained, is a game that really gives a lot more time with the characters. They're not fundamentally better, but you get so much more time that it feels like it pays off. One thing that game does that I realized Guild Wars 2 should totally do, and that is flash sideways. That should be looking at what characters do when we're not there. So in FF14, there's a character much like, say, Taimi, right? A character who's a member of the main cast, hangs out with you a ton, and then they go away for a while. They go off onto another adventure. While they're on another adventure, you may be in the middle of a storyline and a cutscene will appear, and you're watching what's happening with that character when they're miles away, and you actually get to play as that character. And so in Final Fantasy XIV, when that happens, that's such a cool experience, because it's like, oh, here's what Alphino's been doing. Here's how this storyline's going along. If I had had that experience in Guild Wars 2, where Zodja wasn't interacting with the commander, but I just suddenly get a moment where I'm playing as her, and I'm seeing what she's up to, that would be so thrilling and so ripe for speculation. And you know, Final Fantasy's not even good at that moment. They give you like 3 skills. Look at what Guild Wars does. In Season 2, when I get to play as Kaith through the Memory Seed stuff, I get like whole skill bars with amazing stuff. You know that ArenaNet can do it way better than Square Enix does. Guild Wars does everything better. It just doesn't do it enough. So I would love to see that, you know. If I got a sudden flash sideways where I see Logan and Zodja hanging out again after all these years, oh, it would be brilliant. So yeah, anyway, maybe I need to revise my Logan thought. Maybe I rated him a little bit highly, and what I really am just desperate for is older characters coming to the fore. And I do want to say as well, we do kind of see that happen. Like in the Icebreed Saga, there are a lot of random NPCs around who are from random personal story steps and stuff, and especially like Char personal story steps even, which is really nice. But, you know, it's just that quantity thing again. It's like, it doesn't have much impact to me that some of the... It's like trivia. I don't want trivia, ArenaNet. I want stories. And for stories, I think there has to be a lot more meat to what they deliver in those patches. What does that mean? That means less voice acting, I think. Less effort on these flyby cutscenes and so on. Less individual animation work. You know, really cut that stuff back and give us the stories. I'll make that trade. And there's a whole conversation about voice acting we can go into, but that's maybe slightly off topic. Next, we've got Saitos, who said this: you forgot to add the player character to the list. Aha. Well, you're right. The commander is their own character. And I've deliberately taken this question here, but tried not to think about it at all, so it gets thrust upon me here, just like when I was doing the tier list itself. Where would I rate the commander? The commander's very hard because I think they act differently based on what context they're in. Like the commander, before they're even called the commander, when you're a char in the char story steps, you're very different to the commander when, you know, we're in season 3 or we're in season 2 or at any point when they become an amalgam of all races at once. When I think about just the commander in general, I do think about the amalgam version of them, who kind of has to be sort of hands off. Now, I did read some discussion about the Bram stuff, and someone had a really amazing insight about why they don't like Bram. And they said it's not even Bram, really. It's not even that he's this angsty, annoying teenager, and angsty, annoying teenagers aren't fun to be around. It's not that. It's that the commander bends over backwards to, like, be nice to him and never fobs him off and so on, and you don't really get the choice in how to react to that, and you're watching this entity that is supposed to be kind of a representation of you doing things that you have no patience for anymore. You know, if you as a human being hitting your 30s, beyond your 30s, you're a Guild Wars 1 fan or whatever, you're with this franchise, and I do think this franchise has an aging user base, and you've just not got time for this, no patience, you can get really annoyed with the commander at that point. And, you know, maybe Bram takes some of the brunt of it, maybe the commander takes some, and maybe people have had moments like that. For me, personally, I don't really have any strong opinions about the commander, and I think that's a good thing. I think they're alright. You know, they're a goody two-shoes hero. They generally act the way I sort of want them to act. I've never been particularly annoyed or offended at what they do, though I can understand why people might be. It's a real balancing act to have the commander be a real character. You know, people are constantly talking about Guild Wars 3 in my comments again. And I want to say one of the things that Guild Wars 3 would be good at is getting rid of this idea of the commander. Having the player character have a personality, have all these different voice actors across all these localizations, every one line that they write for them has to have, you know, all this work behind it. It's just crazy. And kind of taking the backseat. I don't believe you have to go fully to silent protagonist, but somewhere like what they did with Guild Wars 1, I think is a reasonable middle ground. So yeah, where do I rate the commander? Do you want me to give them a letter? I'll give them a B. I think they've been executed fairly well. No, I'll give them an A. The commander's job is to not get in the way of the story. To progress the story, but not get in the way. And sometimes they'll add a little bit of character in there. And I think ArenaNet do generally very well, because I haven't had many, and there's been a couple, but many of those moments where I'm really annoyed with the commander, and I've certainly never been fuming over them. That's me personally. I get that other people might rate it lower. The commander is one of the most complicated characters you can possibly review. Rasa here says, I can't really agree with you on Ryland. His story didn't make much sense to me. He was going on and on about being a soldier, following orders, but also having a righteous side with borrowing armora and caring for his comrades. And he suddenly throws all of that out the window and becomes a power-hungry arsehole. I do not see the development there. See, I kind of agree with you here. You're disagreeing with my previous assessment. I think you might be right on this. I rated Ryland quite highly. But if I really look at the Icebrood Saga, I feel like this Icebrood Saga has two halves. There's the first half, which kind of ends with the strike mission where we escort the tank, right? And in that strike mission, we get a lot of interesting lore and background about Ryland, about his warband. And there's a lot of really cool themes and fun stuff going on in the story there, isn't there? They're really building a lot with Ryland, and they are setting him on this trajectory where it's like, oh, he's going to be a good guy in the end. He cares more about just following, you know, orders. And that's what I thought they were setting up. And then suddenly, no, we're going in the other direction. And I feel like that's because suddenly, it's because the Icebrood Saga got chopped and changed so quickly, you know. Basically, you can look at the end of Drizzlewood 2. They knew that they were going to have to change directions. After Drizzlewood 2, it's just champions patches, guys. So we're talking about a point early enough in the story that we hadn't even seen Jormag on screen yet. So I think that they just suddenly, they kind of had to race Ryland to where they wanted him. I think they had a really cool idea of a story where they were going to pull the rug out from under us with him. And I think that's beautiful. And that's what I like. I like the idea that they pulled the rug out from under us. Bangar didn't go in the direction I was expecting. And Ryland didn't go in the direction I was expecting. And I loved that for both of them. However, it was very abrupt. So if you disagree with my rating and you say, look, WP, it was too abrupt. You didn't see any development. You didn't see any development. He just suddenly swapped. I kind of agree with that when I really look at what came with the Icebreed Saga. It's very hard, though, because, I mean, the Icebreed Saga has that problem in spades, right? I mean, in one patch, they introduced and killed an Elder Dragon, and they had all this other stuff to do. It was obviously not going to fully explore this stuff. So now we're being pushed into, you know, was it worth gutting the Icebreed Saga as a discussion? And that's probably another topic. A conversation that we can't actually fully finish until after End of Dragons is out, right? The Icebreed Saga paid its dues to the End of Dragons. So we'll see how good EOD was. Was it worth it in the end? Next, and this is quite funny, here we have a comment from someone whose name's just a bunch of numbers. I'm not going to read that. Says, if WP wants to put Joko in E tier for squandering character progression potential, do we have a tier Z for Primordus, the poster boy of squandered potential? I mean, look, I think one thing I will say for ArenaNet, right, in terms of Dragonstorm, is they probably never had any major ambition for Primordus anyway. I think the idea was Jormag was cunning and conniving and could communicate and blah, 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 and a planner and a schemer. And Jormag is the opposite. Jormag is wildfire. He's conflagration. He's just primal madness and energy and damage. And so I can kind of imagine why they thought it was possible to introduce and kill off Primordus in a patch. Sorry, in one episode. Not one patch, right? But in one episode. Because they never had any big plans anyway. So they thought maybe it works. So is he the poster child for squandered potential? I absolutely agree. But I can kind of see what they were going for to a certain degree. You know, I spend a lot of time talking about Primordus, but let's not look away from the fact that Jormag probably came out of that patch a lot worse. Jormag, for all his intelligence and all of his scheming and all his plans, just like walks into our trap because we wanted it to. And just becomes nothing of a character. I mean, that's almost much worse. At least Primordus stayed in its lane, you know, and didn't have any weird wonky moments as a result of Dragonstorm. Well, there you have it. I'm complimenting what they did with Primordus in Dragonstorm. I never thought I'd see it. Daniel Slager says, my reaction to your Bram ranking. My disappointment is immeasurable and my day is ruined. His angry teenager attitude is not Norn, and in the story he gets such a big role he does not deserve. Yeah, he was chill at times, but every moment that matters he disappoints. Makes it the more frustrating. He's an itch you can't scratch. Not bad, but stupid and egocentric, and him being the chosen one feels like a bully kicking you in the nuts. Start crying and going to the teacher, lie you hit him, and getting you into trouble while the bastard stands in the back with an evil smile on his face. My God, look at this. This is some true Bram anger. People don't like Bram at all. I don't get these vibes, but listen, I do want to add another little bit to the Bram story. Maybe I rated him slightly too highly on these grounds. You know, what I really wanted to... Because, look, guys, I loathe that... But believe me, go back and look at my conversation during A Crack in the Ice when they wrote him as a human instead of as a Norn, right? Believe me, I get the downsides to Bram, and I rated him up. Now, my impulse to rate him up was because I do think Season 4 had a good moment and did well with him. But here's what I think actually happened. Then the Icebreed Saga kind of dragged it back down, and this isn't even to do with the crunch. I mean, maybe it is a certain degree, because they could have expanded more on the whole Spirits of the Wild half. Everything they did in Icebreed Saga could have worked if it was a double saga. There was an Icebreed Saga and, you know, a Destroyer Saga, in which we slowly unfolded all of this. Maybe it works. But the thing is, what happened with Bram is he kind of had this great moment of redemption, and it was like he was on the team, and it was like we kind of understood one another once again, and we had this deep understanding. Then the Icebreed Saga kicks up. And what I would have wanted to see most in the Icebreed Saga is like we're bros now and he's got my back and he like understands me and he helps me out and he does what I say to a certain degree and I do what he said. You know, there's some symbiosis. We actually like gel and he's a true asset. You know, that he needed an arc of that where we come out the other side. But what ended up happening in the Icebreed Saga is he fails with the drinking story. Now, here's the thing. I love the drinking story. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I rate Bram up. That was brilliant, wasn't it? I mean, we all look back with hindsight now, but as you're running around in Grothmar, constantly getting those little radio snippets, you're hearing him get more drunk, it's funny at first, and then you realize it's a bit serious and so on, and then he loses the bow. That's a brilliant setup. I mean, the bow never amounted to anything because, you know, the Icebrood Saga got gutted. But it was all good setup, and I think they did something good with Bram there. But following that, what really I think starts to get annoying again is like he kind of goes rogue with all the Spirits of the Wild stuff and transforming himself, and he's not listening to the commander again, and he doesn't have my back, and he's being, and that I think kind of like screws with all the great stuff from Season 4. So once that's been tampered with, WoodenPotatoes, how do you continue to rate him highly? And on those grounds, I think maybe you guys are right. Maybe I should get over how good Season 4 was, because Icebrood Saga kind of dragged his character down a little bit again. I mean, let's see it. Has anyone in chat got a defense of Bram following the Icebrood Saga? I'd love to. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, you know, like, and I think this is lazy, but people say, oh, they just don't like Bram because he's a flawed character. They only want perfect characters. And I don't think that's true, right? I think everyone, that's an easy criticism to throw at MMO story enthusiasts. I don't think that's true. I think people just don't want to feel too frustrated by a character, you know. Like, I'll openly accept to people making mistakes. And, you know, I'm open to a bit of frustration, but, you know, it depends how often they do it. And the one final thing that I don't like about Bram, and this is a live stream comment, and here's the thing, when you watch the live streams and you listen to the devs talk about their own story, you get some insights about why they make the decisions they make. And sometimes that kind of throws me a bit. Like, Bram surviving the Icebrood Saga, like, it very much sounded on a live stream like they wanted him to survive because we weren't expecting it. Like, oh, you thought he'd die. That would be the obvious thing to do, right? But he survived. Now that to me seemed a bit iffy. I think that was just one final extra thing that really kind of killed the sense there were any stakes or anything mattered through that plot. And the question is, you should be keeping him alive because it's in service of something much bigger. What is that when it comes to Bram? What is the much bigger? Is he going to become the next Newt Whitebear? Is he going to lead a bunch of Norn to a new continent way down the line? I mean, I can see him in those capacities, maybe. But I think he won't be around much for End of Dragons. Maybe this will give everyone a chance to cool off on the whole topic. One More Potion Gaming says here, the only thing I really dislike with the characters we met in Path of Fire and Living World Season 4 that didn't join us for the further adventures. So basically all of them. Yeah, and by the way, some of them do appear in the Crystal Bloom. The Crystal Bloom's kind of like this catch-all for the Icebrood Saga, but yeah. Is the fact that we never had a goodbye moment with them. This becomes really obvious after playing FF14, where if we have the same situation in Stormblood or at the end of Shadowbringers, those are that game's 2 expansions, guys. Kind of equivalents of Half-Thorns, PF. There was time in that game to talk to all the characters we had to leave behind. Doesn't matter if they didn't join us, if they had other stuff to do, or because it was actually not possible for them for other reasons. But we spent a bit of time with them before we left. And this is completely missing from Guild Wars 2. It would have been so cool if we had a moment with all of them before we return to mainland Tyria where we say goodbye and we talk about what they're up to next. I mean, they're probably going to be dealing with stuff in Alona, that much is clear, but what exactly is it? Especially Zafira should have had more going on. She was one of 3 characters that got a dedicated blog post between releases about her story. The other 2 characters are Ritlock and Kaith. So she was definitely set up to be something more, in my opinion. Mine too, I think you're totally right to identify that. Don't forget, she appeared in the trailer for what clearly was like going to be the mobile game that got cancelled. So I think she was going to be in that. And it would have been fun to have a former priestess of Balthazar with us when we go back to Tyria in the north. Without this moment of calm and proper closure, it will feel strange when they eventually reappear in the story. Just like we had with Rox. Very recently. Should this ever happen, but let's be real here, most of them never will return, and this makes it all the more important to end the interaction with them in a good way, and not an, okay, we're leaving now, bye. Alright, so here I think there's actually a lot going on. First of all, Guild Wars has always kind of struggled with the epilogue thing. You got to remember, Guild Wars 2 is being developed out of the ashes of Guild Wars 1, and as much as people like to talk about how so much talent has moved on, blah, 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 I do think the practices from the first game come forwards. And in the first game, what they had was like these epilogue scenes at the end of the campaigns, where you just get like a bit of a party and you talk to a bunch of characters, and they were much loved. And you see in Guild Wars 2, they kind of do those as well. You know, the party scene in Fort Trinity, or the party at Amnoon. When you see in Heart of Thorns there wasn't one, they kind of really struggled and really tried to get that epilogue in there. But they kind of don't expand further than that. And just the way they tell the story, I think that's kind of ended up hindering this. Another thing I think that's happened is, I don't know whether it's like getting access to voice actors or what, but like, you know, Kanak went away for ages in the story and then suddenly popped up with a new voice actor. Clearly, he went away. He probably wasn't meant to be away. Maybe they wanted him in Grothmar. Maybe they wanted him in Bjorn Marches. But they couldn't get the talent, and then eventually they decided, right, we have to swap the voice altogether in a story that is not told to the public. So we don't get a good story. Zafira, as you mentioned there, Zafira was probably being set up to be like a thing of her own game. And then the game got cancelled, so now it's like, well, what do we do with Zafira? So she's just kind of left hanging. So I think it's just kind of the development process for Living World ArenaNet struggled with. It's not actually the intent of the writing team, I think, a lot of this time, to leave these characters and we don't really know what they're doing or why they left. And it does have a negative consequence. When I look at like Rox, like, you understand that Rox goes off to live with the Omicron and stuff, but the fact we don't get a goodbye makes it feel like we're not even a real group of friends. We're not even a real group, a guild, you know. Dragon's Watch is just a bunch of people who fuck off and don't really have fun with each other anyway, because we don't get the goodbyes. So I agree. I think this is something that hopefully they can work on. It, again, is just the quantity issue coming back to bite us. There just needs to be more, right? So we actually get these goodbyes. But I think it's a good thing to have identified Guild Wars lacks in sometimes. Next, we've got Marc-Andre Pelletier, who says, I really liked Krisha for the entirety of the Icebreed saga. Me too. I'm really hopeful her involvement in the story continues. I could see her becoming S tier if she just gets a bit more screen time. Ellen Keel deserved to be in the world leader list, and she's probably like C, maybe B. I'm always happy when we see her, even though it's rare, and the opening into Path of Fire was very cool. So a few topics here. Yes, I think you're totally right about Krisha. I loved Krisha. She was one of the best things to come out of the Icebreed saga. It's a shame that I thought the Icebreed saga was going to be a big Norn redemptive story and do all this cool Norn stuff. It ended up being a Char stuff slammed in there, and all my favorite characters to have come out of it were on the Char side of the story. You know, I really think a fully implemented Icebreed saga would have had some great Norn. Jarvi, for example. Jarvi never got on my list, and hardly anyone's even asking Jarvi about Jarvi. It would have had some really good Norn for us to have dug into, as well as some Char if they really wanted to do that story. But Coden as well, you know. I remember that opening Icebreed saga trailer with the Coden on the funeral pyre made of ice as it floats out. God, that trailer was so good. I had such an exciting feeling, and I was so ready for the Icebreed saga back then. And in the end, my favorite characters all ended up kind of on the Char side of things. Definitely, I just don't know what story Krisha would be best in. A story where she's interacting with Bangar is what I'm tempted to say, but it doesn't have to be that. Anyway, the other side of things, yes, Ellen Keel. You're totally right. Ellen Keel's a big character. She should have been the world leader list. There's actually a bunch of characters around Lion's Arch that just kind of never made it. And I would rate her fairly well. I like her. She's very black. Ellen Keel almost, like, she's got a lot of decent backstory written about her. And I like that. And she definitely did a lot of fun stuff in Living World Season 1. But she's almost like, she has very few defining characteristics or ambitions beyond Lion's Arch, so she's almost just used like a tool. You know, when she's used in POF, it's almost like, okay, meet back up with Ellen, and she's like the springboard for stuff. And I kind of like that as a tool, so she's alright, you know. I'd give her probably B tier. I would be very happy if End of Dragons opens with another Ellen Keel moment. You guys might remember during my Path of Fire coverage during POF's heyday, they talked a little bit, some of the devs talked a little bit about how they had a much more intricate idea for an opening to Path of Fire once upon a time. And I'd love to see they do something like that. Now they can actually pull it off with End of Dragons. End of Dragons has been delayed in a meaningful way. It's had a decent amount of development time. This might finally be the expansion that really gets to go big on stuff like that. It gets the good prologue like they once upon a time wanted with POF. POF was less crunched, obviously, and had less cut out of it in the Heart of Thorns, but it was still lacking in the Desolation arc and stuff. End of Dragons could be... I mean, I really believe it could be really good, guys. It could have, it might not have the holes that the other expansions have had. And also, again, I think that the fundamentals of what they were doing in the Icebreed Saga were brilliant. And if those fundamentals are still at play, those talent and mind is still at play, I have high hopes for End of Dragons. I'm serious. Anyway, Ellen Keel could be a part of that X-Pack. I'd give her about a B for now. B or C. So, if you guys kept listening at the end of the last video, I had some extra commentary during the end slate. I've started to try and do that a bit more. I don't know if it encourages people to click other videos or something. I'm trying out. Anyway, on that, I mentioned that I didn't even put Lorantha in the video. And Tarek here says, so where would you rate Lorantha? He's one of my favorites too, even though he doesn't have too much screen time. Yeah, I don't know why, but I really like him. He kind of is like Trahearn 2 for me. He's like, you know, a cool, captivating, I think he's a more fun, to be honest, but sincere, well-meaning male Sylvari character. Had a great role in Heart of Thorns, obviously. I love to see him. In the Icebrood Saga, when Almora died, they did that little moment. I was so happy to see this. They had that little, like, missive or that log that you could read from the vigil where they talk a bit about Loranthir. And that meant so much to me. That's what I'm talking about with, like, the quantity thing. It's like, okay, these characters do still exist. They remember them. The studio wants us to remember Loranthir. I loved that little message. I think that was brilliant. I'd love to see more stuff like that. And hopefully they do something fun with him again. You know, maybe he's almost like what I said with Bran before. Where do we use him in the future? Where he's best utilized? Well, perhaps taking a bunch of Sylvari to explore a new area. If the story ever gets back to the Pale Tree, if the story ever gets back to the new Nightmare Court, if the story ever gets back to the Soundless, all that kind of stuff, obviously Loranthir becomes interesting. Loranthir on an expedition exploring the Echovoud Forest, that would be a cool part of End of Dragons, wouldn't it? I'd be so up for that. But again, I don't know how minimal they want to keep the cast, because they want to actually deliver on the characters they do go for, right? So, it's a balancing act. Another forgotten character here from Plipper2. And oh my god, a lot of you guys talked about this guy. You forgot Lord Farron. Bit of a joke, especially early on. But he has been involved in essentially every major storyline in the game, starting in the very first personal story steps, even in vanilla. And he even had a bit more serious screen time in Alona. And he's totally E. Okay, Farron is a joke character. I think they have to be careful about overusing Farron for two reasons. One, the joke will eventually get old and will fall flat, right? Two, again, I do believe in a bit of levity, but you've got to, you know, you've got to have him in the right place at the right time, right? Would I want a naked Farron running around in Bureau marches while sinister whispers encourage me to become a cannibal, right? Do I think that fits? No, I don't. I quite like Farron as E. I really do like the idea that he's E and there's something deeper to him. If they next use Farron and he's kind of he's not even comic relief feeling when they next use him, but he's quite serious and you like take him seriously and you sort of view all of those old moments with him like under a more realistic lens, and you start to see he can be a bit cunning or whatever, and you realize, oh, maybe this jokey dumbass personality is a facade. If there's a little moment like that, I think they could do really incredible stuff with E. I've sort of realized taking a comic relief character and then treating them really seriously makes me fall in love with them. So for all those reasons, I think Farron could be amazing. And I'm actually on, but I don't view it as a joke. Farron is E. I don't think that has to be a joke. I think that could be serious. I'm not joking. But as far as he's currently utilized, I mean, he's a bit of a joke. The reason that I forgot him on that tier list isn't even just because of the way I structured the boxes. It's because he's not that meaningful to me. I mean, he's funny and he's been of a value to Guild Wars. For what he's trying to be, he's always landed quite well. I'd give him high C, low B. That's where I'd put Farron. And last but not least, we have Leo. And I'm sorry, guys, I could have picked a ton more comments, but I'm looking here at the fact that we've got 40 minutes of conversation already. We have Leo Beast Mode, who said the whole what if part here about Destiny's Edge went on and killed other Elder Dragons after Kralkatorrik. Do you think when Morgemoth would have woken up, it would have scooped up the killed dragon magic and been even more powerful than no Sylvari would be able to resist his call? Now, that's an interesting idea. I really do love this idea of an alternate timeline where Logan didn't leave. Like, it's a beautiful idea to do that as an alternate timeline because that's a character decision. That's an emotion moment. That's a character that's still in the story. That's something that a lot of players already understand to be a pivotal moment of the story. It'd be an excuse to actually see it in engine to a certain degree. And it does spiral the universe completely out of control. So here's the thing. I had a couple of people say, oh, WP, you got to make this video. You got to do it. I don't know whether I want to do it because I would actually have to do a bit of research about like some stuff first of all. First of all, it'd be like a fan fiction video, just as my previous alternate universe one was. I did an alternate universe episode on if the Flameseeker prophecies were never written before. And that might sound like a very separate idea, but hold on. We're talking about Glint again because I can't remember. When Logan left, was Glint already dead? Did Glint die because Logan left already, or was she dead too? I can't remember what happens first, because it's all at the same moment. The Kralkatorrik attack at the lair, they're using Glint as bait, basically. And so here's the confusing part about all of this. First, I'd have to figure that out, but the other side of it is, Glint like had prophesized her own death, right? Or she couldn't see past that moment, and she knew she couldn't see past that moment. And that's why she'd been setting up Glint's legacy and everything. So the universe where she survives Is this a glint that knew she was going to survive because of her powers of prophecy? Or is this a glint that's surprised that she's alive? I think I go with the route where she's surprised she survived. But then it's like, does Morgemoth get all that magic? I don't think so. In this world, what does Glint do about Vlast, you know? Vlast, as lonely he is, and falling off there. I mean, I'm sure Glint would start putting things in place. The magic would get siphoned up. I mean, you could go in some crazy directions. This has an impact for the Zephyrhites. It's not just Scarlet waking up Morgemoth. It's not just now that Zaitan's at threat and so on. I mean, I think you'd have to take some creative liberties to have a really, really exciting story after that. You'd have to do something like, okay, Kraukatoric dies, there's the energy release, Glint consumes it all and becomes an Elder Dragon straight away? They can't be that. She becomes the first replacement of 6. Or maybe you'd have to go something crazy and you'd have to write it that Zaitan was ready to swoop in. We just didn't realize. And now you have a supercharged Zaitan. But then that puts us in a kind of a Zaitan story again, and we kind of follow the same thing. I don't know. There's a lot of fun ways that they could take that. It would be a really cool alternate universe. And based on creative liberties, you could see that going in many great different directions. Well, there you have it, guys. There's some conversation out of the tier list video. I really, really loved the messages. Some people were a bit rude. Oh, no, this is ridiculous. I do want to reinforce that tier lists, as I view them, I don't want them to be a hard science. I don't want to be researching for a week before I give you guys an opinion that I really care about, but I haven't argued quite correctly, and then it's all, you know, I don't want to do that. I want to have fun with them. So that's what they're going to be. And, you know, they'll be springboards for conversation. So let me know if you guys enjoyed this. The Floor, a little bit more chat about this. I kind of want to do another episode of The Floor too. So I'm watching, just like I did with the tier list project, which you guys were very clear you liked. I'm watching how many people even click this video, because a lot of people might not even click it. I'm watching the likes. I'm watching the comments. I want to see if these are successful videos or not. Because if they are, I mean, this is my favorite kind of thing to do. I'd love to just chat with you guys more. These are really fun to make. So anyway, do show your support if you enjoy this and any other ones that I do. And I'll see you for more stuff very, very soon. If you missed it, there was an Echo Vald Forest teaser trailer that came out today. I did a whole, like, analysis of it. I hope you guys have fun. And I'll be live as well tomorrow for the actual main big stream for Echo Vald Forest, which could be very, very cool. So cheers, guys. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time. I'm serious. You don't want to miss the big show, probably. I'll be giving away gems and stuff as well. I have a link to my Twitch in the description. Just open a tab and leave it there. You'll know when I go live.